Gary Thomas says two things you really need to build a successful long-term marriage are the will and the work. The best-selling author and champion of marriages provides this helpful tool for building your marriage, a lifelong love. What if marriage is about more than just staying together? Well, in a culture where some people are getting excited about concepts like conscious uncoupling, I think we need this kind of encouragement. Gary, I'm so glad we have a second assault.
Well, thank you for having me back.
I want to get to those promised 3 key elements. You've picked 3 to a stronger marriage, but you know, I loved that you pulled out Philippians 2:13, and I want people to see this verse. It has a lot of application. It's encouragement for all of us. For it is God who is at work in you, enabling you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. You know, I like to say God influences our wanter. He helps us to want to do what he wants, and then he gives us the power to pull it off, to actually do it.
Absolutely.
And we need both for marriage.
Well, I think that's one of the brilliant things about marriage as God designed it, is that it requires more and more of God in our lives. When you're married to someone, we're talking about a lifelong love. We need God's love to keep us interested and motivated to explore, to pursue, to adore somebody that we already know so well. And God can give us that will. And I just say to couples, if you've started to feel apathetic, if you've started to just feel frustrated, have you ever thought it's not only acceptable, but it's biblical to go to God and say, you know what, I've stopped willing for a better marriage. I'm done with this marriage. I'm tired of being the only one. God can give us that will, and then he can motivate us and give us the work to make it happen. A lot of people would be happy to live in an intimate marriage if it just existed. I mentioned in the book that my wife has to put up with one of the worst backyards in the neighborhood.
You're not a green thumb guy.
I'm traveling so much. I'm not a guy who enjoys all of the yard tools and all of that. And so if we had a wonderful backyard, I'd love to enjoy it, but I don't have the will to make it happen. And I think some people look at that with their marriage, that if they just connected, if they were together, if they were just walking in intimacy, they'd love to live there, but they don't have the will to make it happen, because marital intimacy, like a house, has to be built brick by brick. It doesn't just happen spontaneously. And too many couples think that just because they got married, they're going to grow together, when in reality, if they're not consciously growing together, they're probably growing apart.
You do still counsel, along with all the other things you're doing there in Houston, Texas. In your experience, is it an explosion? Is it an incident that usually breaks the bond? Or is it a case of people just drifting? What do you see most?
Absolutely the latter. What I often tell couples when I'm working premarital counseling is that too many of them think that creating an intimate marriage is like planting a tree. You put a sapling in the ground, you stake it, you water it, you fertilize it, you take care of it. And that's what couples do early on in the relationship. They're sharing past histories and secrets. That builds intimacy. They're touching, they're working through issues, they're being kind to each other. They go through premarital counseling, but then they get married. And then they have kids, and life just happens. And you know, when you plant a tree, it's okay, because 5, 10 years down the road, the tree doesn't need to be staked, it doesn't need to be fertilized, it doesn't need to be, it just grows on its own. But a marriage doesn't. I think marriage is more like building a brick house that you put together brick by brick. And if you stop at any point along the way, and it doesn't matter why, you get bored, it's harder than you thought, is it worth the effort? It doesn't complete itself. You won't grow in intimacy. And so I think a lot of couples, here's what might be seen as a wild statement, but I think so many couples get married not knowing what it would really be like to be married to each other. They've shared an infatuation, they've shared raising kids, they've shared a house, but they haven't grown in intimate oneness. And my thought is, why don't you find out what it's like to be fully and truly married before you give up on the relationship and break apart your kids' homes, and then see how you like it.
Well, and statistics show that living together to see how that works doesn't build a strong marriage.
No.
It actually shoots it in the foot. 3 key elements to a stronger marriage. I want our viewers to see your recommendations, and we need to unpack them, Gary.
Right.
The first one, We talked about a magnificent obsession with God. Now, don't panic. Creating a marriage that blossoms through worship, what does that look like?
It means loving my spouse out of reverence for God. We talked the previous time about recognizing our spouse as God's daughter, or for women as God's son. And I'll always be indebted to God. And when I love my spouse based on who she is in relation to God, I'm not loving her based on how she is toward me, whether she's been kind, whether she's perfect, whether she's doing everything I want her to do. And I'm also loving her in regards to an eternal perspective. When I recognize that eternity is far longer than this life, and God promises to reward us for what we've done, the good we've done, the love we've shown.
Faithfulness.
Yes, I used to think a good day in marriage was when I was recognized and appreciated and loved. And that is a good day on this earth. But in eternity, according to 2 Corinthians 5:10, when God will reward us for the good things we have done, a good day is when I've been able to notice, when I've been able to appreciate her, when I've been able to show her love, because Jesus says that's what will be rewarded in heaven. So if I believe the Bible, my marriage can really set me up for an incredible eternity when God honors those who have loved His children.
And if we read God's honor roll of faith in Hebrews 11, we see the names of many people who didn't see in this life what kept them going forward by faith. Good point. How about passion to excel at a deeper kind of love?
It's what we talked about between the tree and building a brick house. Marital intimacy doesn't just happen. We get into an infatuation. That's spontaneous. You don't have to work at it. It just surrounds us. And we're motivated to do the things that helps intimacy grow. We share past histories. We touch. We resolve conflict. But then we get married and we get frustrated with kids and whatnot, and we say, you know what? I'm not going to talk about it. It doesn't go anywhere anyway. It's not worth the hassle. And so now we're bitter instead of more understanding. We stop doing the things of laughing together and enjoying times together. And look, every relationship, particularly an intense one like marriage, needs times of joy. It needs times of touching. And so it's recognizing that a good marriage isn't something you find. It's something you make. But here's the key. We have to keep on making it, because we change over a lifetime. My wife was a different woman after she had her first child. Childbirth changes a woman, or childlessness will change a woman going through that hurt. Watching babies become toddlers will change a woman. Becoming an empty nester will change a woman. Going back into the workforce will change. So all of these things, if we're not continually pursuing our spouse, we're growing apart, because we're becoming strangers to who they are now. Because my wife, we've been married 30 years now, is not the same woman she was 30 days after we got married.
Well, just the transition from co-lovers to co-parents, and hopefully it's hopefully Dad is involved too, it is a bit of an earthquake for a lot of couples, because, Kevin Lehman says men are just 4-year-olds who shave. They stop being the attention. Squeaky wheel gets the grease, and parenthood is all-consuming. That can be a real challenge for the marriage relationship.
It can be a huge temptation. I've told wives, by God's design, kids are supposed to leave and husbands are supposed to stay. So prioritize your energy, affection, and time accordingly.
And you're not one with your children.
No.
That's a little bit of a wake-up call.
They're supposed to grow away. That's the thing. I mean, we talked before about having a son who got married. His priority now is his new family with his wife. That's how God designed it. That's a healthy thing. My wife and I loved being active parents. We weren't one of those that were counting down the days until we were empty nesters. We still grieve that, because we would have loved to be parents even longer than we were. But it would have been terrifying when we became empty nesters if we looked at each other and didn't know who each other was.
And it happens.
And counselors would say the empty nest years, it's gone up 100-fold as far as couples getting together, because it wasn't that long ago when you entered the empty nest years and you would be dead within 5 or 10 years. I mean, people didn't live as long. But now you're thinking, I've got another 20, 25 years of life left with this person.
And who is he or who is she?
And they're just breaking up. But here's the thing. I've talked to 2 different counselors who have done research on this. And they say late divorce can be as destructive in a late teen or early 20-something's life as when they were little toddlers. That in some ways it can be even more damaging, because just when they're ready to go out into their world, their stability is torn apart. And so not only for our kids, but I think for ourselves and for the kingdom of God, we need to continue to pursue each other and to make that intimacy happen, because it won't happen by default.
And lots of encouragement in the book. Third point, the 3 key elements to a stronger marriage: intentionally pursuing oneness. And I guess this is where it just bubbled up. You know, we aren't one with our children. We are called to be one with our spouse.
Yeah. It's what we all want, but there are a couple things that get in the way. Dishonesty is a big thing early on in marriage. We want to be known and loved, but then we're afraid of being known and loved. Before my son and now daughter-in-law got married, Graham was visiting us in Houston, and we got together at a restaurant. And my wife was the last one to arrive. I was coming from work, and she saddled up to me and just kind of, you know, and Molly said, "Oh, are you cold?" And Lisa says, "No, I haven't seen him all day. You know, I really miss him."
And that's after how many years of marriage?
It was 30 last June, so I was 29 back then. And I got to tell you, Moira, it made me feel like a king. Now, here's this woman that literally knows me better than anyone in the world, still likes me, still somehow manages to respect me, although that says more about her than me. But if I was hiding from her, if I was keeping my sins from her, if I was living a double life, that same thing would terrify me, because I would like it. And I would say, she likes me because she doesn't know about X and Y. She respects me because I haven't let her find out about Z. And so I will work even harder to live this double life. But I'll tell husbands and I'll tell wives, it is impossible to be intimate with someone you're lying to. You can't. And so one of the greatest blessings of oneness is honesty, but one of the most difficult parts of achieving oneness is honesty. And that's why, again, I love grace. I love the gospel. I love the presence of God, that when I know I'm accepted by God and I can receive His forgiveness, then I'm able to be honest before my wife, and the same with her, that we can forgive each other. Grace is such a key to lifelong intimacy.
There's so much more wisdom in these pages, but let me just conclude with one of the quotes. You say the end game: to be closer to God, closer to love, and closer to each other. I get it, Gary. Thank you so much for being here, for writing the book, for what you've shared with us in these 2 short segments. I just wonder, you know, because you are the marriage man,
Well,
do you feel targeted? I mean, is it the enemy must want to just trip you at every turn?
I hear that a lot, but I have a stronger God than I have an enemy. And God has shown His grace in me. And again, I have to receive God's grace. I don't think anybody who knew me early on or knew Lisa early on could say they would be a model married couple. And those that know us well still see the struggles that we face. But it's a testimony to God's work more than to our character or our love that He could take. I was as selfish and egocentric as a young man could be when we got married. But I found greater joy that 30 years into our marriage, I think my wife and I are honestly more into each other than we were even 30 days.
Fantastic. Great. Great to hear it. You know, you may be struggling right now, and I would be remiss if I didn't tell you right now that we are here for you. We would love to pray with you about anything that is robbing you of joy and hope today, especially if you need prayer for your marriage.